Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday gathering at the storehouse. Glad to have you back, and I'm glad to be here with Tony once again. Morning, Tony.
Hey, Dad.
And I think the most important article concerning the Middle East that I saw this week had to do with the fact that IS has taken Ramadi, and that the Iraqis that were leaving Ramadi or being beat out of Ramadi left all of their equipment, hundreds of vehicles, including a bunch of tanks, and they're showing off that they're now in possession of what looks like 3 to 6 from the pictures, I guess, that are showing Abrams tanks, M1-A1 tanks, and those are really pieces of war machinery, I want to tell you. And so ISIS is growing, and nobody's doing anything about it. It doesn't seem like anybody's doing anything about it. And we've been talking about it for weeks, how it started out as that one picture, and now it's grown into this evolving giant. Even though a week or so ago, an aerial attack on one of their headquarters buildings killed the second in command. So evidently the king is out after him with stills flying his sorties and stuff. The funding is still coming through the Saudis. The Turks don't want to get involved unless we're going to protect them, and they want to fight. We want to fight against Assad. The Middle East is in real turmoil right now.
I'm not sure. The more I look at it, the more I feel like we're discussing an episode of Dallas. Who shot JR? You know, and they're laying down all the clues and all the places they want us to look. And because when you think about it now, like if you look at World War II, you talk about the Allied troops. Well, who are the Allied troops now against Islamic State? Israel, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the United States, and pretty much all the Western world. And then even Turkey, to the extent that they're saying, well, we want our empire back, so you want to saw it out, we want to saw it out. But of course, we don't want to give that empire to Turkey, and that's why they're not. We have similar goals, but different conclusions to the matter. You know, I can't stop thinking about the piece of information we've come across recently that I think we've talked about it maybe the last couple of weeks. That these countries that turn out to be terrorists or otherwise rogue nations all happen to be the ones that don't borrow World Bank money. They're people that aren't signed up for the United Nations to be on that, to put their resources and their children under the direction of the United Nations Security Council resolutions. And I mean, boy, I don't even know where to start, because the world is so upside down. When I say that, I mean what they tell us is all a fabrication to continue a particular story. Meanwhile, the tensions, of course, are extremely high, but what are they really high over? There is no war on terrorism. It's invented like the Cold War. Who's the king flying sorties against? They're on the same team. Jordan, Israel, Saudi Arabia, backing Islamic State, part of the CIA connection, Al-Qaeda, they're all the same people. It's all a Mossad event, if you want to look at it that way. It's bull. It's like the lunar landing. It's like 9/11. It's not really happening like they're telling the world. It can't be. Who's fighting? Who's killing each other over there? Except the people they're dragging into this on the fringes. if the whole Islamic world was up in arms, you'd have a scary situation. That's what's coming. But I don't think for a minute that the Muslims are fooled by this. They must know that this Islamic State is funded by the people they hate and is but more of the game coming at them. How could we know it's not what it says to be on the surface? So why do we pretend the people on the other side are playing as if it is what they pretends to be on the surface? They never have. I mean, the new Saudi king as soon as he became king, he put up a prestigious prize for somebody that could prove that 9/11 was an inside job. Russia threatens to drop the bomb that they can prove 9/11 wasn't no plane attack. I mean, the whole world. Venezuela, rogue nation, terrorist nation. Why? Well, they won't borrow money from the World Bank. They won't get on that central banking system that anyone who wants to be allied with us must be on. So you're either on that central banking system or you are the opponents of it, and we're coming to this great war, which seems to be over that, because when you look at the evidence, Libya, first thing they did, change the banking laws. Egypt, the big reform is changing the banking laws. Iraq, the big crime, he took them off the petrodollar. Iran, not on the World Bank money. Cuba, never. I mean, so all the countries that are Libya, Iran, Syria, is it just a coincidence that these are the rogue nations? And what do we do? Traditionally, not we, what does this banking cartel for the last 100 years do? Sink the Lusitania, start a war. Pearl Harbor, start a war. They're behind the wars through what that group of people, what's referred to as the Hegelian dialectic that group of people understand as the basic socio-psychological relationship of human consciousness to reality. It's somewhat like my own idea of the paradoxical perspective. The highest doesn't stand without the lowest. You don't know what big is unless you know what small is. Big has no meaning unless they're small. So the Hegelian dialectic is that big is the thesis, small becomes the antithesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis is the resolution. And so to the people who are in a position to, let's say, protect their empires or all that they possess, which is in this banking cartel of the West, this central banking system, it's the resources of the West. And in order to protect and project that into the future, what you need is to play upon human psychological, social, conscious application, the way that we work. So you need to give us the thesis, red team, the antithesis, blue team, and the resolution, which turns out to be, in every case, constant bickering, if you will, constant tug of war. See, that's what turns out to be the synthesis becomes a never-ending middle ground, if you will, achieved in the case of controlling nations or selling weapons. You can see, I should say, in the banking world, achieved by loaning money to each side to be the antithesis of the other side's thesis, right? So that what you get is a constantly revolving door or tug of war where both sides need the money to keep tugging their way toward their thesis or antithesis. Big, no small, no big, no small, no big, no small. So what the bankers figured out is if I'm in the middle loaning money to big and small, that's the place to be. So that's where they position themselves based on this concept of the Hegelian dialectic. So that what we've had for the last 100 years is just nonstop conflict that never, goes from a Cold War to a hot war to a war on terrorism. These things were all planned, by the way. You go back and you see that there were these, who planned it, which, well, it would appear that the group that comes out of Cecil Rhodes' money, the Rhodes Scholarship that our President Bill Clinton won. Everybody thinks what a great thing, the Rhodes Scholarship. This is a recruiting arm for the most powerful group of central bankers, the most powerful group of people in the world, or at least in the Western world. Russia and China and Iran may have something to say about that in the near future, but these guys are the most powerful group of people in the Western world, and they, you might say, they're the people who pull the strings. And how do they do it? They're surrounded by the members of the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, which is a private group. You have to be asked to join, and there's only about 4,000 people, and they conspicuously hold the highest offices in government, presidents, secretaries of state, CIA director, secretary of defenses, all the defense contracting companies, the board of directors, all the big old schools, the board of directors, Harvard, et cetera, all Council on Foreign Relations members in prominent positions of authority on these councils by the hundreds, in the school system, in the medical system, in every system that bleeds down now to the everyday man and woman. Is this fairly small group of human beings, 4,000 of them, in this extreme positions of power, all the heads of the corporations and people that sits on the board of directors of these giant corporations, Ford, GE, Coca-Cola, blah, 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 all of them. You can hardly name a one that you're familiar with that doesn't have a CFR member as an executive officer or a chief in the board, something like that, someone with some importance in that company. And that's because, and then of course, most of the people around them, they know who the people of the CFR, you know what that means. You're talking about a made person. You're talking about someone who's, they're one of the leaders of the Western world. They work for the leaders of the Western world. And so when you work for them, your job security is pretty solid. Your company ain't going under when you got a CFR member on the board, right? So you tend to do what their suggestions would favor, right? If the CFR member of the board, a David Rockefeller or one of the Rockefellers or one of the, Hillary Clinton, if she's on your board, do you think you're going to, well, no, Hillary, the board's going to do something else. Oh, okay, yeah. Right? You think those people don't know who they're, how they got there and who they're messing with and those sort of things. So I think it's enlightening to see that the Western world is a cabal of bankers who control the military through their United Nations, and they've been pushing for 100 years to get the sort of dissolution of these Western borders and all borders in the name of and it's not this one world government in the name of an evil presence. It's a world government in the name of protecting the more important things like human rights, making sure that no dictators get to slaughter their citizens, okay? The system that we have and have always had of sovereignty means, even though we might have this great country where we take care of our people, man, you go to another country and, well, it's whoever the king, whoever the monarch, whoever the ruler, whoever the tyrant, and they take life and give life like it's the, ancient times, king of Persia, you know, like their deities unto themselves, right? So there's a reality to the concept. Hey, that doesn't. How are you going to forward the idea of liberty and personal freedom in a world where the people you're bringing that to really can never leave the world you've brought it to, because everywhere else they go in the world is full of tyranny and no respect for that. So there is this real concern in the sense of utopian ideological concern for a governing body that is universal to an extent, with of course limited scope theoretically on what they can advise other countries and step in on. And this of course has become the modern concern and call for activism, is that you can track this progress over the last 100 years and see how what these people have put in place legislatively in the United Nations is a way in which to put the world under commercial slavery to their banks, to their loaning institutions, because money is debt, fiat money is debt. It's debt slavery the minute any of these countries, and it's been proven now. I mean, Jamaica was a perfect example, but there isn't an example of the World Bank helping a country that needs help, ever. They only go in and use the money to enslave the country into debt and then utilize its natural resources for the benefit of the multinational corporations who sit on the board of directors of the World Bank, which happen to be all CFR members for the most part. So this is, what we're talking about, that's raping and pillaging under legal license and then setting themselves up as the world cop that can fleece anyone they want for anything they want. Oh, but they wouldn't do that. They just want to keep us from war against the terrorists. Okay, and that's why, that's why I'm always talking different than most people who are verifying this. I'm trying to point out to the people that listen to us that's not, we are the terrorists. And it's very easy to track in history. It's very easy. Saudi Arabia was carved out by the English and given to these wackos, this Wahhabism that's the most radical form, as we call it. See, when did it become the most radical form? They didn't even exist till we gave them the money. So the great English nation with all its laws and its rights and its human rights, we give them the money to start their nation, carving out, just so happens, Mecca and Medina, two of the holy spots of the Muslim nation. That must have gored the Hashemites pretty good. Let's give it to these people who are willing to be radical mercenaries, because that's what we're talking about. They're paid to have this country, just like Jordan. The kingdom of Jordan was finally paid. Okay, the West paid for his country. He went to school in England. He speaks better English than Arabic is the word on the Jordanian king. The guy's, he's practically an Englishman who's the king of an Arab country. And all his power comes down through the money from this banking cartel. That's why you don't say no to them. You're on the team. So I'm telling you, he's on the team, and he's the moderate. Thesis. Saudi Arabia is on the team. They're the radical. Antithesis. Solution: weapons to keep the balance of power, right? And so that's why the Hegelian dialectic played perfectly into the whole idea of the bankers' world, because all the way back from Napoleon and such, funding both sides of the war turns out to be where the money's at. Somebody's always ready to take somebody else's property. Thesis handy. We want it blue. We want to paint it all blue. We want to paint it all red. Perfect. Which is how you see how it comes down in history that these guys have supported every side. They supported the Nazis. They supported the Allied troops. They loan money to both sides. They're an equal opportunity lender. In fact, if there's not enough going on in the war, what? America's not going to get in and borrow money? Are you kidding? What about Pearl Harbor? What Pearl Harbor? And next thing you know, we're in the war. Tons of money. They talk about how it, stimulated the economy and all. Well, yeah, it made these few people so disgustingly rich. And then they dropped the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima and got to go own the rebuilding of that part of it, because the Eurasia was always part of their need to own, and that's why we're owned China what? Through debt slavery, basically, only it's the other way around. It's credit slavery. How's that for a little twist? Yeah, we'll pay you Tuesday. If you will just give me a burger today, I will happily pay you on Tuesday. And that's just gone on now so long that, what can they do? But just keep playing along with us. So, but in the Middle East, you've got, the Wahhabism, why did we keep funding it? Why did the West keep giving them money if they were so radical? Why didn't we say, hey, wait a minute, guys, you can't be so radical. We can't be associated with such radical people. No, so they were set up to be radical, just like Jordan was set up to be moderate. If we'd have wanted Jordan radical too, we'd have made Jordan radical. We give them the money. We'd have told them what to think. Hate those Jews. Love them. Hate them. No, love them. No, hate them. No, love them. Hate them. Love them. Thesis, antithesis. And like I say, you go back in history, this is written into when I say the historical think tanks, like the Iron Mountain Report from the 60s and such, and then you go back further to the guy Quigley, that was a friend of this Cecil Rhodes and an admirer of the secret society that he founded that was trying to bring this new world order. And for Cecil Rhodes, the idea was to perpetuate the British kingdom, which in his view was bringing civility, laws, decency to a world full of savages, right? So this was his whole, it starts with a reasonable premise, although again, let's not make him a saint. This is a guy that went down there and was given like the whole South African land, all the gold mines, all the diamond mines, and from what history shows, he didn't exactly give it to the people. He was he's one of the wealthiest men who's ever lived on the earth. And his 7 wills, only one is widely known, and that's the one to establish the Rhodes Scholarship Fund, which again now, as you see all this, it's because the other money went to establish this secret society, which does not make it automatically demonic. I really believe all that's been planted in the internet. The more I see, the more I'm convinced. All these Christian sites trying to paint it demonic and show the same pictures over and over of movie stars and call them demonic, as if all these people go home to their wives and kids, honey, I got to go down and slit the chicken and rub the blood all over me first before we have dinner. I'm not seeing it, and it's funny how it's only nowadays with the internet and the modern world you don't see. Katharine Hepburn wasn't doing that apparently. I mean, nobody's accusing Marilyn Monroe of demonic mind control. They're saying they poisoned her with drugs because she knew too much. She was sleeping with the president and wasn't the kind of stable person at that time to be. I guess I've read they were worried, people who wanted access to things the president might have said or just to know details could have kidnapped her and tortured her and gotten what they wanted. So they figured she had to go. But nothing about Hollywood mind control there, because of course that comes far later, and it's not Hollywood mind. It's all just a bunch of bull. It's the very subtle art of suggestion and predictive programming and things like that. It's very subtle. It's a very subtle art to get people to to follow the herd instinct.
Well, the thing that I find very interesting about having watched it all this time and then bringing all of this other data from the outside now into this to make to have the ability to add up why this prophecy is coming to pass. And all these years of watching has laid that out for us. So, and I always knew that it had to. If you watch this thing long enough and you watched it close enough, you would eventually be able to put all the pieces together.
Yeah, but I still think, Dad, I'm astounded by the new knowledge, because all these years watching it, it's always taken on the surface meaning. CNN says Osama bin Laden did this, and we plot that on our geography. Okay, Osama bin Laden's terrorism, and we're fitting terrorism into our version of reality with the scripture, which of course it's always going to lead to the beauty is once you know the end, you're watching the plot to see how it develops. But the twist in the story is finding out that the person who you thought was the bad guy, it turns out he wasn't really the bad guy, or that he was wearing a disguise that the plot didn't suggest. His real identity wasn't suggested in the plot. It was that twist that you get where you're led to believe the person's the innocent one or the simple one, or a thing like The Usual Suspects, where Edward Norton plays the janitor who's got he's a handicapped. And so all the other suspects seem much more so. As someone watching it, the viewer, as the beauty of the screenplay, you're completely transfixed trying to figure out which of the other people, because Edward Norton, even though you think you're trying to figure out how could it be him, he's a retard. He's handicapped. He's not the guy. He's to balance out the crew there. And then, of course, in the end, what you're shocked to find out is, oh, he was the bad guy all along, pretending to be the retard. And so this is how I'm seeing this new knowledge. All of a sudden, I feel like that what the Lord is demonstrating to the people who are looking, because you really do have to look. You're never going to hear this in mainstream media. When you do, it's all going to be shrouded in, Illuminati, devil worship, all the Christians with the asteroid that's coming, and the terrorism, and the conservative position, the thesis must remain. War on terror. The antithesis, as we learned through the Iron Mountain report of the 60s, this think tank, you don't want your thesis antithesis on opposite ends of ideological spectrums, ideally. You want them as close together as possible, so that the illusion of choice is sufficient and the resolution much more. The resolution never has to travel wide variances in its progress, because, for instance, as I read in an article not so long ago here about what we've been talking about. With the politics of the Middle East and all, that I know it was G. Edward Griffin that said this, that that you get each team screaming about something. Hey, war in Iraq. The conservatives say we got to go to war immediately. No stopping to think about it. The Democrats say, hey, wait a minute, we can't go to war immediately. You got to stop and think about this, right? Thesis, antithesis. Result. We go to war anyway. The Democrats concede. They just argue the antithesis point, right? So that you have this represented as, because this is what Hegel was trying to point out, this satisfies the conscious need for reconciliation. Thesis, antithesis. If I don't have anything, you have to. There is no such other way. This is how it works. Every idea is weighed by the antithesis, and this is the point of what came out of that report that Griffin was talking about. Is in the political system, when you can get that thesis, antithesis right next to each other, well, you don't have to go far in the solutions. You don't have to travel all the way to this end of the ideology when thesis wins, when the red team wins, and then all the way to the other end of the ideology when the blue team wins. You just keep bringing the red and blue team closer together, closer to the center, while still representing the thesis antithesis dialectic. And this is what we have in our politics, right?
And so this is what See, I've always believed and I've always tried to teach that prophecy is not the engine that's driving history. Prophecy is the story of what the human race did with its own free will that brought about the end that's depicted in the spiritual end of the story. Now, just because over the years they've tried to kill the spiritual end by killing the spirit, which they've done. I mean, they've taken God out of the equation practically 100% of the time as far as the world is concerned now.
And all done right by the same process, the Hegelian dialectic of starting all the way back with the monkey scopes trial, where the ideologies were very far apart, and so the synthesis or compromise or reconciliation remains a gap, remains having to bridge this wide gap until you bring the sides closer together, and that's been done by the immovable pillar of Darwinian naturalism, science. There's nowhere for science to budge. See, science can't, the thesis of scientific reality can't come off of it to say, well, half science, half magic, right? Well, that's not scientific reality. So the very thesis of scientific reality has to remain stationary, while the antithesis of spiritual and supernatural reality is free to keep giving ground away to come closer to the idea, well, spiritualism doesn't have to exactly be, for instance, creation in 6 days. Come on. It's like a flat earth society. That's a tough one to maintain anymore as far as, against the thesis of modern science. The antithesis of flat earth or creation in 6 days, well, then the resolution becomes, strict matter of faith on one side, bridging all the way over to a strict matter of science on the other. And you have this gigantic gap that's that never can be synthesized. And this is where
and so the power keeps rising to the top because money.
Well, this is where your trouble.
The money system is put into a solid place on the earth and in society, and then that's taken over through manipulation.
Well, it's due to the fact that there's certain ideologies that can't be synthesized, so you're bound to have conflict. That's the whole point. The conflict is built into the whole thesis, antithesis dialectic. There's no other way. Small, big, small, big, small, big. Neither is the other one, and neither can become the other one. And so there's built into it conflict. The conflict is resolved for all of us in our consciousness through some sort of what Hegel called synthesis, but I believe is more what we'd call compromise. We compromise, well, okay, big, small, I'll take the medium, right? Hegel called that synthesis, but when you get to ideals that stand on either side of that dialectic and can't be synthesized, the resolution is conflict, war, which turned out to be exactly what plays into the hands of these bankers, the cartel, the military-industrial complex, that whole thing. And now, as that's starting to be questioned in the 60s, they're having these wars of attrition with Vietnam that nobody approves of. Korea, these things that they're coming through history now to them as being unsustainable means of their dialectic, keeping this war games going. You say communism, I say capitalism. You say collectivism, I say individualism. And these are ideals that we can only keep conflicting about. And in fact, if we keep planting those ideas stronger and stronger in the other side, rather than ask you to see how close our positions really are together and that we don't need to fight. No, I'm going to invest in think tanks and institutes to promote communism from that side, to strengthen it, to make it more resilient, more zealot, so that it can't do anything but stay over there and fight capitalism. And meanwhile, I'm going to ingrain in capitalism the absolute loathing of anything antithesis to capitalism, right? So that in that it's constant conflict. All I have to worry about, these two come together. Mm-hmm. So what do I need to do? In the schools, in the societies, keep their own ideas flourishing by pushing them stronger into their own corners, right? The very opposite of the political system, where you don't want to create a conflict that costs constant warring, because it's like a civil war where you're blowing up all your own stuff. You want to create the thesis antithesis, where the progress of the plan doesn't have to be compromised by the particular thesis or antithesis of any of the parties being on different sides of.
What I think has happened over the years, as they thought what they needed to do was to get rid of God on any level, or to show God as something that was ridiculous, so people would choose against it, the thesis, antithesis of God is spiritual. And by doing that, they have removed from the equation prophecy, which they can't help but fulfill on the trail that they've chosen.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the poetic justice in it all, but you look at the modern society too, the thesis, antithesis over God is, the thesis, let's say, has been made this traditional idea: God created the world 6 days, sits on some throne in the heavens, judging everybody. His prime concern is to get as many Christians as he can before he destroys the world. This becomes the thesis that's promoted. Mm-hmm. It's not really the true one, but it is the one, and it comes out. I mean, look at how television evangelism. How did that get so big? Son of a gun! If they weren't putting the money into that, make sure those guys look like the representation of the thesis, so that the antithesis now can be presented in physics professors that give us the real breakdown. Einstein kind of. Let's give that as the antithesis. So now, make up your own decision. What's the solution for you? What do you choose, Einstein or the television evangelist with a whole a selection of makeup shelf stuck to her head? Tammy Faye. The bakers I was trying to think of, right? So, I mean, that's who they give us. I can't even imagine that those people weren't actors, that they weren't even paid, that they were not part. I mean, when I look back, all that I've learned in the last 20 years, I would not doubt for a minute that this, now they didn't have to necessarily know the scoop, although I don't know how you act like that without knowing it, but when you look at the way it's structured, these rings within rings, when you look at what Cecil Rhodes did with his money, trying to ensure that the English system of government and governance would have a force behind it that would be secret, so it couldn't be stopped.
Yeah, it had to deal with imperialism, because he wanted to expand the empire and bring that kind of social awareness as the British had, as the way of life on Earth.
Sure. Well, it was, of course, the pride of the devil, if you will, that super arrogance of thinking that they could tell everybody what to do. And, maybe some of them were even, from the religious standpoint, thinking, that it was their duty. But, from what I've heard, that wasn't really the position of Cecil Rhodes. He seems to be much more interested in spreading the English ideas of governance.
We're down the road 100 years now, and the situation in the land of the Bible, where the Jews live now, because they've been brought back, has turned into this anti-Semitic building situation around the world.
Well, I mean, I think now I'm trying to paint the framework to get us closer to what I envision as the real structure that we're looking at now. It's not the one on the surface, war on terror, these terrorist nations. They're not terrorist nations. We're the terrorist nation. They're banding together. These are the people that don't want to borrow the money from these gangsters that have been around for 100 years. They've seen what they did to America with their central bank. They've seen what they've done to Europe. These guys have busted the world. They don't seem to care one bit. I don't think these Arab peoples are stupid about the RIF chipping they want to do to the Western world. They want to get all your money on they want to know where it is. They want to know where you are, where your money is, because truth is, it comes down to control. Nobody wants to lose control. And once you've got it, well, I guess you really feel stupid if you lose it, don't you? I've been saying for years with the whole marketing thing and such, watching certain companies that were on top at a time when they had very little competition, when, say, the 70s and 80s, when all of these new things were emerging into the marketplace. And you come out into the marketplace and you're just the cat's meow. Ocean Pacific in the surfing world, OP. Boy, when I grew up, there was very few clothing labels that, were beach labels specifically. There weren't that many, but boy, Ocean Pacific, they had the look, they had the label, they had the pros, they had everything any top corporation today that really owns it all has. Real monopoly sort of power. How do you lose that? How do OP become a nameless, faceless, nothing brand when they had it all? Well, mismanagement, obviously. They had the chance to stay on top, but they didn't keep that. They didn't keep improving. They didn't keep progressing, and they lost that. And so if I was, if that was my company, I'd be embarrassed. I'd feel foolish. I'd feel like, geez, we already are on the cover. Everybody already wants all our stuff. We already have all the pros, all the magazines. Everybody's the world is at our feet. How do you lose that now to become a non-entity to all these other companies? Well, of course, there's a story behind all that. But what I'm trying to say is that it's a natural inclination, if you're on top, to want to stay on top and want to do whatever you think you can do to stay on top. And so after World War II, these bankers were on top of the world. They defeated all the other pretenders to the throne, let's say. They funded both the military of Germany to soak their people of money, soak the Japanese economy of money, get the Americans in and soak the American, the English, the French, the Italians. They all got soaked by the banking cartel, by the central banks. That's who funded it all. That's who got paid back in the end. Paid back from the losers in debts owed, paid back from the winners in booty and spoils, right? They funded it. So this is what our modern world grows out of. Anyone who doesn't understand that will never understand what this war on terrorism, what's going on. The war on terrorism, and it's been predicted since the 70s. It was predicted. The Cold War is a lie. After this, we're going to have another war, a war on terrorism. Okay? Climate change. You want to know where that came out of? This Iron Mountain report. Because, see, I want to get back to that, because what this was all about, this group, this think tank, was to contemplate the idea of what would happen, what does America do, what are the consequences of prolonged peace. Since we knew at that moment we could have peace. The country's screaming for peace. If you think about it, this is 1966. You got all the hippies out there getting shot by
Vietnam's just getting to really start.
And you got everybody wanting peace, and so the politicians are thinking, what does it mean, prolonged peace? How would we do that? How would that work? Because see, psychologically they already knew that you go into the peace, well, people have leisure time, people have time to become intelligent. This is all in this report. They study, they learn the classics maybe, they learn music, they become educated, they become cultured. And they may not want to follow things like fractional reserve banking, which is essentially robbery. It's legalized theft. And it amounts to debt slavery. And so if you let people educate themselves, if that's the result of peace, they get educated and they get off the debt slavery, well, then I'd rather have war than peace. I mean, this is what comes out of this, that the most stabilizing effect on society is war. Because, if Osama bin Laden wins, oh my God, if Iran wins, we can't have, they'll come after us. So we'd rather listen to someone like George Bush or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. We'd rather, that's better than ISIS. See, this is what they are. This is 1966. So this was already what they were proposing. Now, that's why war works so good. They'll follow a crook as the lesser of two evils. Well, I mean, yeah, it's George Bush, but when we have freedom, but those horrible people will take our freedom. Because you have to understand why we have a war on terror and what it really means and why it's really mostly in the media and probably not as much actual bombs going off as it implies. Since who are we really fighting? Who are we fighting? We're not fighting ISIS. We're paying ISIS. ISIS are the mercenaries. We're paying ISIS. So they're not killing any of our assets, I guarantee you that. That would be very silly. So who are they going after? Well, Iran and Syria have decided not to take the world dollar deal. They don't want their people turned into consumers. They don't want to set up a banking system based on central banking, as we now have in Libya. See? And we'll have in Egypt. And that's why the Antichrist, he goes after Saudi Arabia, he goes after Egypt, because these people are all part of this system in his world that he's going to try and get rid of. So you have to look at this that way. This is what's really setting up. And these people that are doing it, meaning these bankers that have been positioning all these things, they really do have a plan. And I think that's why right now what you have is Iran and Russia mobilizing as the only two real forces in the world. Along with China, of course, throwing in with them, but China's not an army nation. They're a producer nation. They're a manufacturing nation full of factories that make plastic crap.
But they have one of the largest armies in the world.
Yeah, they have. Yeah, that's always what we hear. They have a lot of people that they can put suits on, but they don't have weapons. We can blow all those people up in just a couple of bombs, right? We're not worried about that standing army, really. That's all, from what I understand, that's just all scare tactics. China, unfortunately, is stuck with us. That's why I think you don't see China coming in the Bible. They're just waiting to see who wins. They're going to build the plastic crap for whoever wins. You know, they're like the central bank. In fact, I just can't imagine that when Eurasia was our first big goal. That's why right after securing the Arab countries in World War I and that whole exchange that got that sort of part of the world secured, then we turned to Eurasia in World War II to get that part of the world secured, right? Now we're returning to the Middle East because that's where you have this final ideological polarity that can't be settled except through war. But see, in China and Japan and such, well, it did. We undermined their dynasties and their empires and turned them into good little consumer for brain dead, brain dead modern. I mean, look at those countries now. These were old world. China, oldest civilization on earth. Japan, very old civilization. Their views, philosophically, ideologically, far different than the Western view of things. Look at them today. Japan became the biggest producer of televisions and
consumer goods,
cars. China, same thing. Look at their countries, blinking lights on every corner. It's like an insult, right? Just a plastic country of plastic, people producing plastic stuff for the people who conquered them. So that's why I don't see Japan, I don't think we worry about those people coming together. We destroyed the empires that could do anything. And then the other ones, the Koreas and the Vietnams and Laos and Cambodia.
Those were surrogate wars with China and Russia.
Well, no, but I mean, so those are just these territories that never can present. They can never present that same opposition as a real dynasty, as a real empire, as anything. So yeah, we've just we left them full of napalm and disease and cut them off as much as possible from any technological advances that might be paid for by the West, by the money that the bankers have looted out of those areas. So that's why I say, don't think the vision of all this isn't very clear to historians of other cultures who study the last 100 years and look at what's resulted from what happened in this move of the Rothschilds that becomes the central banks of Europe, that becomes the central bank of the United States, that becomes this push for a United Nations. I don't think a lot of the conservative Christians and conservatives in general in my culture understand that this United Nations is as utopian a dream as it may have been to some people, though I doubt very much. These are the people that were happy to live the status quo of genocide to the Native Americans, genocide to the Australian Aboriginals, genocide to the Arawak Indians in the Caribbean, genocide on every corner with us. So these are the same men that wanted to set up their United Nations so they could commit genocide on every indigenous people that didn't want to be under the thumb of their council. Well, I don't know. As I say, we would never write it that way, would we? We'd say that we want the betterment of mankind, and et cetera, et cetera. But if someone decides that the betterment of mankind for their culture is to chop down a certain tree, and the United Nations has decided there's not enough of those trees for the corporations who need them, they can go in and say, no more tree for you. Just, like Hawaii. Hawaii is another example of a nation, just a sovereign nation, recognized by every country in the world except for the United States and England. Sovereign nation. And we went in and just murdered their people and took their nation for what? Land to grow sugarcane. I mean, that's what it was. It wasn't tourism industry, back then. It was land to grow sugarcane all year round. They had the Carolinas and such, then the South. But boy, oh boy, Hawaii. So, what does Isaiah say? And the way I learned it through Scott, a nation terrible from its beginnings. Clearly, when you read Isaiah again, and you see about this nation that holds the gates of its enemies, tramples its enemies, etc., all these sort of things. This is the United States. The Babylon in the end of Revelation, I mean, clearly the United States and the money cartel that is this Babylon system that dies in a day. See, I'm more and more convinced that's why everyone mourns all over the world. How could this be? How could this be? And Nostradamus, of course, one of these You don't hear his name much anymore, like you were saying, because we've gotten prophecy out of our dialectic. Because that side of the dialectic no longer talks prophecy. They simply talk Jesus, good and wise teacher, morality, religion's good for morality. Yeah, it's a scam. Yeah, it's a myth, but it makes people good or better. Right? That they brought the dialectic all the way that far. The materialists still standing on Darwinian materialism, even though there's no, you know, as we've come 150 years from Darwin, there's hardly a shred of evidence that any of that actually had 250 years. I mean, there's hardly a shred that any of that has happened. There is no missing link. We can't find it. We can't find that we come from apes. But they haven't budged on that side of the dialectic in the public view. And the whole world of supernatural has been watered down, lukewarm, right? And so I bring up Nostradamus because we've been, you know, listening to some of his quatrains on the internet the last couple of days, and I'm just blown away. I mean, there's this guy that started writing these prophecies in 1555, a Jew. And I don't know, people should check them out for themselves, but they really, to me, seem authentic in the light of all these years of study. He seems to be pointing to all these same events. He talks about an Islamic Antichrist at a time when, of course, the whole world for the next 500 years and still is looking for a revived Roman Empire. He says he's going to come from this area that's clearly Islamic. He talks about the warring Islamic nations, the Black Turbans. He talks about a new law coming to Palestine, in the Jewish Syria Palestine region. A new ordeal coming there. He talks about financial collapse happening so quickly and unexpectedly and affecting all these people. So now,
some places it's almost like reading Revelation.
I say it, you know, and of course he would have had access to Revelation, but he doesn't mention anything like that. It doesn't seem to be the thrust of his prophecies. He lays them out in these little quatrains, these 4-line poems that have had to be deciphered over the years. So there's lots of translations. Apparently, most of them aren't as good as they could be, but they still have shown us all this insight that he apparently got. And the financial collapse is what struck me as being interesting, because he really, at his time, it just seems an odd, the prophecy and the people that it affects, the amount of effect that it has, a financial collapse. It sounds so now. It sounds so contemporary when you think about when he was laying it out. And I mean, he's really sort of undoubtedly a prophet, in my opinion. Everything I've been seeing again now, I remember looking into him many years ago, but it's been a lot of years, and I've noticed, one of the things I noticed when I saw his name on something I was looking at on the internet, and I thought, boy, yeah, I haven't thought about Nostradamus for a long time. Was he really a crackpot? Or were his, here we come, we're coming into it. Did he see any of this? I mean, I was thinking to myself, I don't remember his prophecies. I just remember thinking way back then, oh, I'm impressed. But I couldn't remember why I was impressed. So now, looking at it again, I'm like, oh gosh, now I'm really impressed. Now I'm actually convinced. Now I can't see how, being someone who studied prophecy all my life, that I could think anything but that he was getting accurate visions. And so this financial collapse, the war in the Middle East, he sees what appears to be a comet, though he doesn't call it a comet, trailing fire. And then that's where I want to get now to this whole idea of the Christian world seems to be all over this. Comet's coming, and soon, May even, this month, 2015, comet's going to hit there, associated with red moons, all these Christian sites, all these religious sites. Now, first, I want to note that when you look at this secret society and the way that it works and the way they've infiltrated all of the institutions of society, religious included, religious, educational, everything, political, judiciary, everything. And it's not like everybody's in on a big conspiracy. They're all working for somebody above them who's hired them to do a certain job. And when you get, it's the rings within rings philosophy that was employed, according to Quigley, who wrote the history of the beginning of this secret society and the wishes of Cecil Rhodes. You see that the ring closest to the center is the one made up of these 4,000 CFR members, conspicuously in, the powers that really run everything. They're the ones that make the hiring decisions on top management level people, the ones that decide whether the program that the company is pursuing is the right one. And if not, they hire different people or send the word down to those people that no, we're not going to talk about that tonight on this news channel. We're going to talk about this, right? So it's not that the person in the getting the word as the studio chief or whatever is necessarily involved in some plot or conspiracy. He's doing his job. His job comes down from someone who got a phone call from someone who happens to be on the CFR. And that's the someone that we're talking about. And so when you consider what's going on, the religious people seem to be all in the know on the internet. And when I look at all this, I've come to realize it's all false. It's all being fed down through this chain. And that doesn't mean something bad's not going to happen. In fact, it may even mean the opposite. It may be that they're telling us, but they're telling us through all the hype and the fear and the false flag means to do it. So anyway, it all plays into the prophecy that we're watching. There's no doubt in my mind, but I'm trying to throw a different view out there for people that we're not watching this war on terrorism. I'm not. I'm watching this elite group of Western bankers who have succeeded in placing Saudi Arabia in power for a generation, Israel in the midst of these people for a generation, Jordan and preserving the Hashemite kingdom for a generation amidst Iran, Syria, Libya, Egypt, other countries that were less desirable. And so we made regime changes, starting with Iran, Iraq, Libya, Egypt. We influenced all of these places to get the type of solution that we needed at the time to our thesis antithesis dialectic, which was to keep the Jews over there and keep the guns selling to both sides, because that's what has been determined by these people that keeps them in power. But of course there must be a resolution to the dialectic at some point, because what they've looked at is how do you keep from constant war? What's the potential for to live in some perpetual type of peace? And so the word from this Iron Mountain think tank was the only thing they could come up with. They thought of alien invasion, sell the people on alien invasion, War of the Worlds, I think is where they tried that first. But they thought that would be very hard to maintain credibly. You could maybe pull it off at first. Aliens are invaded, show some stuff. But then how are you going to keep that going for any length of time? What's going to keep the threat in your mind that aliens really are here unless you can produce some? So they said the only other thing is the threat to the planet itself. If people thought that the very planet itself was under attack and jeopardized, they'd be willing to take the same sort of sacrifices to liberties and living conditions and these sort of things that they do in wartime, when they'll follow even the worst guy because it's better than than the outcome of being conquered. Well, even if our politicians aren't the great, if they help save the earth right now, because we've got to save the earth. And so this is the only thing that they found that that could keep people following such ridiculous leaders. And so climate change was implemented and has been part of this program. And in the name of climate change, this whole UN agenda is now being pushed right to the front where they wanted it for 100 years. See, and that's where I'm trying to tie it in to this, to the MO of what's going on, bringing us to these battles. This Western culture of bankers are finally ready to implement this United Nations that can tell other countries you need to do this and you need to do that, or at least start beginning that process of legitimate stealing, basically putting other countries under the thumb of the World Bank, of all these different things. Although I think they know this is the idea of the ideology there in the Middle East. They're never going to get it, which is why it has to come to World War III. They're just going to kill everybody and start over with a moderate Middle East. That must be the idea there with the Hashemite king. But so what we have is this push toward the one world government of the United Nations based on having to save the planet. And I think that this is what now is stirring Putin in Russia, because he knows, I'm sure he's read the Iron Mountain report. He knows that climate change is a political arm, and he also knows the power that we have with this HARP technology and these other technologies to create havoc in the earth. It would appear. I mean, I suppose I can't say for sure, but the more that I research it, the more it seems undeniable that, again, the billions that we spend are not for nothing. These radio wave grids that we build, these arrays that send microwaves up. I mean, there's a lot of science now out there on the internet to show you what that does, what it's capable of doing. And when you understand all the patents that they have from Tesla, that they have had all these years, a whole generation of scientists working on Tesla's understandings. I just, it's sort of hard to believe that these guys don't have some of the capabilities that they're accused of having, and that some evidence points to. I mean, it's not like that you can pull the skeleton right out of the closet, but boy, it's like you get peeks through the door and you get to see the, hey, wait a minute, I think I do see some bones in there. And so right now we're making our move for this United Nations rulership, and Russia and Iran and Syria, they don't want that. They can't have that, because they're not going to come under any dialectic that brings them all that close to the Western debt slavery central banking system. And when they see what, we go into Libya and we are changing the bank. I mean, do you think they don't know our intentions and what's coming? They have to, and so they have to defend themselves. So anyway, as part of what's going on, I saw today on the internet that apparently England is sending their largest warship, or has already sent, I don't recall, to Russia to be right there off the border of Russia. England's largest warship. It's pretty impressive. Looks like a big cruise ship painted gray with a lot of war stuff hanging off of it. And so, I mean, I don't know, that costs a little money to send over. It's a little aggressive, right? I mean, I don't know, your largest warship, go send it off the shore. Why? Why? There's lots of evidence that Malaysian plane that was shot down, it was an attempted shoot down of Putin's plane. If you haven't seen that evidence on the internet, it seems pretty convincing, and I don't doubt it one bit. even if it was a warning to Putin, but it doesn't seem like it. They shot it out of the air. That's hardly a warning. They couldn't have necessarily known that the two planes were flying next to each other, that Putin's plane was cloaked. So anyway, in all this, I wonder if all of this is even, part of their grand story, but I don't think so. Armageddon, to me, is the answer. Prophecy is always the answer. There's no reason to fight a war like that if you have control of all sides. A war like that only comes about because there's two opposing ideologies that can do nothing but finally clash. And so that's what has to happen in the Middle East. The Muslim world cannot abide the infidel world as it's become, and so they have to take their last stand, I suppose, against it. And I think that's what's brewing right now in the Middle East. Whether we see, the headlines are becoming less and less meaningful to me, because the real picture is seen, as I say, in what this group of bankers is really doing in pushing this Agenda 21, which is the agenda for the 21st century, of getting a hold of population number, all this stuff through the United Nations, really applying their concepts for, empire rulership through the United Nations, so that people can't waste their resources that could be used for these bankers and these other countries. They have to borrow money to enslave them to the resources, and it might be evil. The people behind it might be worshiping Lucifer, as many of the Christian sites claim. I'm just not sure about all that. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
You can't serve two masters. You
Right,
can't serve God.
well, that's the whole thing. The fact that they're serving money seems to be where God pointed out. Some people had said serve demons thinking that they're gods. That's another thing. But the people that serve mammon are these people that come down in the end to be the real enemy of God. And isn't that the way it always has been in the Old Testament? Isn't that what I'm always pointing out? What did Jesus have against these guys? They cheat the scales. They don't take care of the widows and orphans. They look after themselves. They stock up their own comfort, their own wealth. So, it's that same old thing. And of course, the difficult spiritual path is, denouncing that for this idea of, self-renunciation or the renunciation of our own desires to be worldly. And so imagine how hard that is when you're on top of the world and you own it all, right? Yeah. The rich young ruler, see? And that's where that whole lesson comes out. You can't serve both two masters. And that always brings me to this modern world where I don't know, do you see the Iranians? Are they known for multinational corporations raping Hawaii, committing genocide on the people around them to get the resources? Is this the history of Iran? I don't really know, but I know it's our history. I don't know if that's what Syria is known for. I know they didn't do it in any of the parts of the world where our guys were doing it, because we were busy doing it. So I don't know if they have been raping and pillaging their end of the world. Maybe they have, but I tell you, nobody's been a bigger raper and pillager in history than the English and the Americans. They're the empire that went around and took everything. They're the one that put Cecil Rhodes in South Africa and gave him all the gold mines and the diamond mines. They're the ones that supplied the weapons over here in America to destroy all those Native American people, take their land, the Hawaiians. So yeah, get your mind around what's really going on. The Western cartel, of which unfortunately America and the red, white, and blue and the great fight for freedom and liberty against the terrorists, that we are the terrorists. The great fight for freedom against the terrorists is the terrorists creating the terrorists to fight against, so that there's terrorism and not peace in the world. Mm-hmm. That's what's really going on. So that's all.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a very complicated thing, but chaos is where it was supposed to go, so that out of the chaos can come the order that they're looking to bring to the world. And so you're in a front row seat, because the prophecy that we've followed all of these years is not only showing up on the stage of history, it's just about ready to finish, to close it's come into its final act. And we know for sure, and we feel that we know for sure, that there's only one place to turn, and that's to God. And watching all of these years has brought us to this conclusion, that it's going on right now. And there's something big in the wind right now, that some big move that's planned between now and September that's happening on this earth, that you should keep your eye on in conjunction with this, because the Middle East is a great part of it. And
well, you know, Dad, sorry to interrupt, but I didn't want to confuse this week's show, but that's what the Wednesday Bible study, that's what we're going to talk about this week, is what we've been, right, this other issue of what's going down right now in the Western world, in America particularly. I think that's an important thing for all Christians. Certainly, I think all the Christian stuff out on the internet is, from my years of study, misinformation. It's all planted. They don't necessarily know that it's misinformation. I'm not saying they're bad people or bad Christians or anything else. I'm saying that all this talk, I've seen the pattern quite clearly. It's the propaganda that's come into their world through their channels, which is exactly what we should expect, because it's exactly the way they set the machine up to work. It's why our kids come out of Harvard with these ideas of economics being the thing that's breaking, deregulation and such, teaching them, instilling in them that they're smart for thinking this way. Our kids come out after spending all this money and they're participating in a system that's, an economic nightmare, a pyramid scheme, but they haven't been given the tools to know that. They've been given the opposite vision, that they're actually the intelligent one for arguing against anyone who would present the real knowledge. You see what I mean? That's so we're in that position. We should expect that. So a lot of
these, what's causing the chaos.
A lot of these Christian sites out there, man, oh man, they're getting their information handed down to them through the system, and they're zealous and they're trying, but they're misleading people. So anyway, the Wednesday show, if you get a chance, please tune into the Truth Not Tradition Bible study, because I really want to talk about what's going on, who's behind it, and what we should all be watching as Christians in the world right now, so that we can be aware of that.
Thanks, Tony. And folks, as always, when I close, I need to remind you that this is a storehouse where you get your meat, and stand up and cheer loudly, because frankincense is the answer there. You got to hilariously and joyfully do what God asks you to do. Give to the storehouse where you get your meat, so that meat's available 24/7 to all those who would come and partake of it. Until we see you again next week, well, stand up and cheer, because it's offering time. And we appreciate those offerings, because they are what keep this word coming to you all these years, straight and narrow. We don't jump around from one place to another. We're watching the prophecy come to pass, and how that's happening is the important thing. Knowing how it happened is what's going to save your life, because in the end, all you folks who haven't turned to God, you're going to have to. Until we see you again next week. For Tony, I'm Brother Sal. Have a great day in Christ.